Shall I go ahead, Samar?
Just a minute, it's connecting on Facebook. It's going.
So I can start, I think, right, Samar? It is, it's being...
So yes, you can start.
Thank you. Welcome. First of all, sorry for that bit of a delay with the technical glitch. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. It's 10 p.m. here in Canberra, 5:45 p.m. in Kathmandu, and 1 p.m. in London. Welcome to the 18th webinar of the IIDS on politics, economy, and public policy. We also have an organizing committee to run this webinar. I'm Sudyumna Dahal, PhD candidate at the Australian National University here in Canberra. We have Dr. Pradhan, assistant professor at the University of Essex in the UK, Samar Rana and Devika Thapa from IIDS in Kathmandu. Without delay, let me introduce to our panel today. Our speaker for today is Dr. Uma Pradhan. Dr. Pradhan is a lecturer at University College London, Faculty of Education and Society. Prior to joining UCL, she was departmental lecturer in South Asia Studies at the University of Oxford, where she held early career fellowship from 2018 to 2021. She is also co-convener of Education.South Asia Network, an interdisciplinary network of researchers and practitioners working on and in South Asia. She co-hosts a postcard series, Nepal Conversations. I would highly recommend our participants today to check out on the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, or SoundCloud. She's committed to public engagement through her other multimedia projects as well, such as documentary and photo essays. I would also recommend to check that out as well. Dr. Pradhan's presentation will combine two of her recently published researches, which I have just shared in the link as well. First is from the book chapter entitled Politics of Social Protection in Nepal, State Infrastructural Power and Implementation of Scholarship Program. Second research is jointly carried out with Martin Chautari entitled Social Assistance Program for Education in Nepal. So she'll combine two of her researches in today's presentation. Our discussion for today is Jasmine Rajbhandary. Ms. Rajbhandary comes with a very interesting background. She was born in Lesotho. It's a tiny country in Africa, and she grew up in various parts of Africa and the United States as a UN child. She did her master's in international development from American University in Washington, D.C. Over the last 25 years, she has worked on various international agencies. Currently, she works at the World Bank as senior social protection specialist, where she leads social protection projects in Nepal, but she has also worked in Bhutan, Bangladesh, and India. Her career has focused on working to improve lives of vulnerable communities, children, women, and in helping to develop processes and services which help them to have better lives. Some kind reminder of our ground rules today. Please keep your mics muted unless you are invited to speak. Dr. Pradhan will speak for about 30 minutes, followed by a few minutes of commentary by Ms. Rajbhandary. We will then open up the floor for questions and comments. Please use the chat forum to ask your questions or to raise your hands using the Zoom feature. And sorry about the starting this slightly delayed today because of the technical glitch. Dr. Pradhan, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, IIDS team, for this opportunity, and also to Jasmine Rajbhandary for taking the time out to discuss, be a discussant for my presentation today. I'll first try to share my slide. Is it visible now? Yeah. Okay, so before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the two collaborative research that I draw on, and this is and the partners partner organizations with whom I conducted this study. The presentation today is based on these two researches conducted as part of two different collaborative research projects. First one is Effective States and Inclusive. It was part of ESID Research Center, which is Effective States and Inclusive Development Center, based at the University of Manchester's Global Development Institution. And in Nepal, the Nepal part of the research was conducted in collaboration with Social Science Baha. And the second project that I draw on is Danida-funded collaborative project, which is titled Public Finance Dynamics in Education. And this was part of the collaborative project with Martin Chautari, Kathmandu University, and Aarhus University. And I was based at Aarhus University in Denmark while I was conducting this research. And mainly today's presentation, in this presentation, I draw on the insights from two co-authored publication. One was published as part of edited volume, and the chapter in Nepal was called Politics of Social Protection in Nepal: State Infrastructure, Power, and Implementation of Scholarship Program. And the second publication was published as a research policy brief as part of Martin Chautari's series on research brief, and it was titled Social Assistance Program for Education in Nepal. I also draw a bit on a paper that we're working on called Bureaucratizing Social Justice, and this is not published yet. So the presentation today is focused on the dynamics that shape the implementation of social assistance program for education in Nepal, and it is popularly known as scholarship program. It is a small amount of certain money is distributed to different students in government school in Nepal, and it is more seen as it's a nationwide educational assistance program that distributes cash stipends to primary and secondary school of marginalized communities, especially in government schools. So the scholarship program mainly entails an annual cash stipend of between 400 and 600. At the time of the research, it was 400 and 600 that is distributed per annum to Dalit and girl students, and around 1700 per annum to poor and talented students at secondary level. And also there are several other categories of scholarship that are distributed to students in, for example, Karnali zone in Jumla district, and also to different students in from marginalized communities, students with disabilities, and students affected by conflict. So this cash stipend is provided directly to the target students, and preferably in the presence of their parents or legal guardian, or if and in some situation directly to their parents. And at the time of this research, these cash stipend program operated under the school sector development program, and it was coordinated by the Ministry of Education, who dispersed this fund to district education office, from where they were allocated to all government schools in the district. This would have changed now to, and the coordination would have moved to the municipalities and the local government after the restructuring of the state. The scholarship program was seen very widely as both, performing both symbolic and instrumental roles. Symbolically, it was seen as a commitment to social inclusion and commitment to bringing different marginalized groups within the fold of education for all. And instrumentally, the program was also seen as a way to address the political demands made by the marginalized group in the last few decades in Nepal. And in this presentation, what I'm trying to do is to focus on a scholarship program as a way to unpack some of the broad factors affecting the implementation of social protection programs in Nepal. And in particular, I'm trying to highlight the importance of narratives and competing frames and logistical challenges that shape the implementation of social protection programs. This draws on the field work in 4 different districts: Ilam, Saptari, Lalitpur, and Jumla. And in these 4 districts, we conducted, along with the social science Baha, we conducted an in-depth interview of parents and guardians, school stakeholders, and such as head teachers, and member of scholarship management committee. And also, in addition to this, I conducted an in-depth ethnographic fieldwork on actual implementation of a scholarship program in one of the government school in Kabrapalanchok, and closely studying who received these caste stipend program between the year 2015 and 19. And as a part of this fieldwork, we gathered statistics from district level officials, as well as I mentioned earlier, some in-depth interviews with parents, guardians, and key informants at both district level and school level. So the scholarship program is expected to cover children's educational cost and provide some kind of incentive for marginalized groups and girls, students from marginalized groups and girls to continue going to school, really addressing the access gap and the performance gap in education. And this is in addition to the free primary education to which they are entitled, and it is estimated that scholarship program is one of the largest social protection program in education sector, because it has because it is provided to all girls and all Dalit students in government school, and it actually forms quite a huge proportion of the total budget for education. And for example, at the school level, students would receive varied amounts depending on which group you belong to. And overall, it did form quite a huge part of the educational budget in different districts, even though what the students actually receive per person might be very, very low. It does form quite a huge proportion of education budget in all the districts that we looked at. So, really looking at the kind of information that we were able to gather from all these different districts, some of the I would like now to just highlight some of the key points from our research. Scholarship program in Nepal has been adopted within this social justice framework that we were talking about earlier, in terms of addressing the historical marginalization based on gender and group-based marginalization. So even when the factors such as attendance and attainment in the school are mentioned as important factors within the scholarship discourse around scholarship program, in practice, scholarship program may be distributed regardless of these factors. So this framing has around the issue of social justice, social inclusion, has led to the use of categorical targeting to distribute a scholarship program, which means that the scholarship is the stipend is distributed to all girls and all historically marginalized castes who attend government schools in Nepal. So this has actually worked quite well in the context of Nepal, because categorical targeting considerably limits the logistical demand placed on the state in comparison to, for example, let's say poverty targeting. And therefore, in the context of Nepal, where there is a limitation in state infrastructure power and very limited logistical state capacity, distributing it to all girls, all Dalits, and all historically marginalized castes, these are identified at a local level. This kind of categorical targeting has actually worked very well. This has meant that the scholarship program has extensive presence across the student population and is distributed more or less almost regularly, even though in some places, we'll talk about it later, it gets severely delayed because of various reasons, and sometimes the actual amount is much less than what has been promised. So moreover, the coverage of Dalits and Girls Scholarship is quite comprehensive because of its program design, and the amount is very small. It is not adequate to cover all the education related costs or any other opportunity cost that is associated with participation in education. But despite the small amounts disbursed, the scholarships seem to ease the financial burden of the students, and people often shared that they felt seen by the state, and the recognition of the historical marginalization, and that the state was at least giving them something. So, for example, in this quote by the teacher in Saptari, when the teacher mentions that when the student receive money, students are happy, parents are happy, and they would say they could at least buy some pen, stationery, bag, etc. with this. The government is at least doing this much. And another parent from Ilam explained that even if it's not much, it is enough because it gives some kind of relief to the poor, and we can buy some notebooks copies for 2 to 3 months, and it brings smile in difficult times. So in summary, this kind of framing of scholarship program has resulted in the dominance of this categorical targeting, which actually reduces the logistical burden on the state with like Nepal, which has quite limited infrastructural power. So this means that this form of social assistance for education in the form of scholarship, or this kind of stipend, educational stipend, has expanded over a period of time, with many more scholarships being distributed across the country over last few decades. Another key point is that while the scholarship is increasingly expanding in terms of its adoption, and as one of the key way to distribute educational assistance to different groups in Nepal, it is also increasingly framed, as we discussed earlier, as social justice and overcoming past marginalization. And this has actually also resulted in the size of the transfer becoming very, very small. So this size of the transfers raises question about the ability of a scholarship program to make meaningful contribution to these objectives. As discussed earlier, the amount that is distributed to students is very small, 400 to 1700 per annum to most of the categories, and there are only few categories where the amount is higher than this. And the state's program criteria also mandates that the school limit each student to only one type of scholarship. So there is no overlap between different kinds of scholarship that is distributed to the students. So our study found that all schools actually stringently followed this instruction and avoided any kind of duplication in the distribution of cash. For example, a Dalit girl student can claim a scholarship under either the Dalit or the girl child criteria, not both. So they will not get both scholarships. So and the bureaucrats and the school authorities across the research site complained that the money provided here was too little because of that the cost associated with education is quite high now. And in comparison to that, the 400 that is provided is actually not adequate at all to buy a uniform or stationery that would cover the entire year's cost. And for example, and people are able to, if the students did not come to the school and worked, they would earn more. So that had been one of the biggest challenges in really understanding the utility and importance of this scholarship program. So the social justice framework and categorical targeting that we were talking about earlier has also led, on the one hand, reduce the capacity, reduce the burden placed on the state's logistical capacity, but also has led to scholarship amount being very, very small, and many view it as merely a symbolic act. And one of the major problems faced in the implementation of scholarship program is that there is delay in its distribution and limited information circulated amongst the stakeholders, as well as lack of clarity in governance mechanisms. So this shows the ways in which limited infrastructural or logistical power of the state contributes to the major problems with distribution of the scholarships. At the time of our study, the governance structures, the governance structure to oversee the distribution of scholarship looked something like this, with multiple responsibilities of selection, information flow, disbursement, reporting, and monitoring placed at different actors doing these functions. And in particular, the main implementation failings of the scholarship program were seen to be the relation between state agencies and the limited capacity of the higher levels of the state to monitor the distribution and coordination between different levels of the state. The logistical problems included factors such as the district education officer and the team of resource person were simply not equipped to deal with the volume of monitoring and reports from the school. On average, it was estimated that the a district education officer would have a responsibility of monitoring and reporting 100 to 400 schools and thousands of students. But now, with the restructuring of the state, the situation is likely to change, with more power being devolved to the elected municipalities. The school was also the scholarship management directive actually mandates that the school scholarship district scholarship management committee is established to monitor the distribution of scholarship and oversee the school level scholarship management committee. But these committees were not formed in any of the schools that we studied, that was part of our study in the 4 districts. And similarly, the district level and resource people and school superintendents who were responsible for the monitoring of a scholarship program were not really clear about their role. And head teachers of the study school actually told us that they hardly saw any school superintendents. Scholarship directive also mandated that the school level audit committees submit a report on scholarship distribution to district education office, but we hardly found any of these kind of reporting mechanisms, and these were neither clear or nor it was effective at various research sites. And the implementation of scholarship program was also further impeded by the inability of state, both at the central and the local level, to maintain the database of the student. This was one of the biggest logistical problem that scholarship program had, and the challenges faced by the district education officers to provide the up-to-date information on the number of students in the timely manner, and this actually hindered the ability to release full budget and district in time to the district and to the schools in time. So this definitely reflected the weak logistical capacity of the state, and the district education officers were actually also responsible for maintaining this electronic software for recording school data, which is called Integrated Educational Management and Information System. And in most of the places, they were not maintained, and the district education officers actually really struggled to maintain these database for various reasons, and including the schools in their jurisdiction not having access to computers, electricity, or having staff with adequate computer skills. And as a consequence, schools sometimes submitted their data in print rather than using the software, and this also meant that maintaining the up-to-date database was one of the biggest challenges that schools and district education office faced in distribution of scholarship, and this also led to a situation where there is often a mismatch between the number of eligible students and the actual budget that is released to school, because the budget was released based on the incomplete database or last year's database in terms of number of students. And so sometimes the schools also reported that the scholarship amount released to the schools account is often and up to 50% less than the actual number of students in the schools. So under these kind of circumstances, head teacher and the school level scholarship committee, the ad hoc committee that would distribute the scholarship, would consult with guardians and distribute the reduced scholarship equally to all eligible students, and not always the amount that was promised or that has been allocated on paper. And as we have discussed, the scholarship program is also affected by different kinds of objectives, or different kinds of tension between different kinds of framing. As we have talked about in the previous section, this scholarship program is justified in relation to different rationales. One is as a productive intervention, and second is as a means of addressing social marginalization. As a productive intervention, as a program with a productive framing or objective, it is seen as a way to enhance literacy and human capability of the students. It is seen as a way to increase attendance or achievement in the school, in performance in the school, whereas as a social justice framing of the program is a commitment to social inclusion in response to the political demands, or in response to the historical marginalization that certain different groups have been facing in the context of Nepal. So and here the idea is that this stipend should be distributed regardless of attendance and regardless of attainment in the school, regardless of the achievement that the students may or may not have in their school performance. So with this shift to social justice framing, as we discussed earlier, the program design increasingly utilizes the categorical targeting to identify the recipients, but different levels of the state, different levels of the scholarship distribution bureaucracy used these different objectives and different framings at different times. So there were always some kind of tension in terms of who should get why should scholarship be distributed. So schools navigated in terms of at the level of implementation, because in this study we were really looking at the level of implementation rather than the level of adoption of these social protection programs. So at the level of implementation, the schools navigated these tensions by distributing scholarships irrespective of attendance conditionalities, and the result was to really broaden inclusion rather than use scholarship merely as an incentive to raise attendance or achievement of students in the school. So this approach has also got potentially placing fewer demands on the limited infrastructure capacity of the state, and in this way scholarship program in a way exemplified the protective dimension of social protection policies, designed to really provide recipients relief from deprivation, and its coverage was also considered more or less pro-poor. Another tension that really shaped the program, although it was really embedded within the strong impulse towards social inclusion, social justice, and inequality, the broader discourse on implementation have also been often shaped by the discussion around whether the program should be based on group-based inequality or poverty-based inequality. So this kind of discontentment with this discursive framing of scholarship program, you can actually really see very clearly in different policy documents, and the question of who deserves support in the form of social protection has therefore remained a persistent policy question. So, however, if we really look at more closely, if we really look at the selective component, some of these scholarship are also there are some selective component within the scholarship program, especially, for example, the program targeting poor and meritorious students. It shows that in reality, the selective component tend to concentrate more on higher caste social groups. So, if you in this table that is from one of the schools where we did a more detailed study, if you really look at the right hand side table, which shows the groups for poor and meritorious scholarship, which is Garib Tatha Jahendar Vidyarthi, they tend to go more to high caste social groups rather than Dalit or other Janjati groups, and because the scholarships is not like a student cannot get more than one category of scholarship. Generally, girls would receive a smaller amount, which is around 400 rupees, and Dalit students would receive around 500 rupees, whereas the Garib Tatha scholarship, which was slightly higher, which is 1700 rupees, would go to high caste social groups. So these findings kind of cautions against this kind of ongoing policy emphasis on the discourse of needs-based approach, and it also kind of shows that the policy dilemma of a choice between group-based and need-based is actually quite a risky one as well, where need-based program may reach income-poor population. It may not always guarantee the reach to the historically marginalized groups. Similarly, in some schools, there were some practices of selecting students, especially in grade 11 and 12, which until a few years ago operated as more of a private school, even though it is within the government schools, because it was not really part of the compulsory education in all the places. So the schools were providing some kind of 10% scholarships in grade 11 and 12, and these in some of the schools, they, in a way to identify more deserving students, and in a way to incorporate the ideas of merit and need in its design, the school followed extensive screening to ensure that the scholarships were provided to most deserving students. So, and in this kind of context, they relied more on documents, exams, personalized assessments to verify that the students were eligible for scholarship. So this not only placed huge demands on the logistical capacity of the bureaucracy, of the school bureaucracy, but also when we really looked at who got these scholarships, it tended to privilege those who were most capable of navigating bureaucratic practices and institutions through the use of their own existing economic or cultural capital. So the scholarship programs, to summarize, it has proliferated across the world as one of the very important interventions led by state to promote social inclusion, and scholarship program has been one of the important education assistance program that has been distributed in Nepal within this broader context. And in summary, then this presentation and the case study of this Nepal's scholarship program also highlights in the implementation of, in the successful or the dynamics around implementation of these programs. It highlights the importance of shifting narratives, competing frames, and the logistical challenge that shape the implementation of scholarship social protection programs, in this case Nepal's scholarship program. The framing of scholarship program has resulted in the dominance of categorical targeting, which reduces the logistical burden on the state, which already has a very limited infrastructural power. But despite this kind of attempt to frame scholarship program as a means of overcoming historical injustice, the reality of this kind of low-level transfers actually also threatens to undermine the transformative potential of the program, even though these minuscule payments, even though these payments are appreciated by members who receive them. I have also tried to show that the infrastructural power of the state and its logistical capacity influence the successful implementation of the program, and these limited state infrastructure power led to delayed and reduced payment, and this is also likely to undermine the positive contributions of the program, either to address social injustice or to make productive investments. And discursively, two main tensions continue to mark the implementation of scholarship program. Firstly, the tension between the productivist and social justice framework, where on the one hand, scholarship is seen as a way to viewed as a more productive investment that would enhance literacy rates and human capability, with minimum attendance criteria for the disbursement of scholarship. On the other hand, scholarships are also perceived as a state's weight commitment to social inclusion. And secondly, the tension between the need-based and group-based approach also is quite prevalent. And I've tried to reiterate that the policy dilemma of the choice between group-based and the need-based is quite a risky one, where a need-based program may reach the income poor population, but may not always guarantee the reach of the historically marginalized groups. So let me end there, and thank you very much for your time, and happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Pradhan, for this very comprehensive presentation. You touched upon very important issues on education, social assistance, and inclusion. I mean, three very big topics, as the local election is approaching soon, and other elections are coming in, and political parties have started having these lofty dreams on all these three topics in their election manifestos and whatnot going. So it's going to be an interesting how it's going to shape Nepal's these policy issues going forward in the next few years. Now I'd like to hand over to Ms. Rajbhandary, if you could take a few minutes to comment on Dr. Pradhan's presentation, and then we can open up the floor for the questions.
Great, thank you so much. I first quickly thank IIDS. I think this has been a great opportunity for me to take a step back from regular work and do some reading. So that has been fantastic. So thank you for that, as well as this opportunity today. Thank you, Dr. Pradhan, for your insights. For me, because there is limited literature on social protection in Nepal particularly, I've read your paper, I'm still reading the book, and really been listening to you with quite keen interest. It's quite a coincidence, but the book, Politics of Distributing Social Transfers, which I believe you have a chapter in, is actually being discussed in the World Bank next week at BBL. So maybe a little bit of a summary and then some comments from my side. I mean, obviously, you've managed to present some very interesting facts and figures, but I think beyond that, key in what you've presented is really, in summary, if you will, two aspects. One, the importance in terms of government's intent, the clarity of intent in providing scholarships. And I think what we're very much hearing, which I'd agree with, is that there's a lack of this clarity of intent. As you were saying, is there a shifting narrative when it comes to targeting, objectives, is it group-based or inequality? That lack of clarity of intent, I think, is key for us to understand. The second sort of and I'll refer to I's during sort of my few comments, as you were saying, is really around the challenges of implementation, whether it be the weak state infrastructure or the selection strategy. I think for all of us, these two are critical if we're going to try and understand the third I, or impact. And really, has the impact just been of scholarships being, wonderful to be seen by the state, or is there in fact more in terms of that? And I think for all of us, given the investment that the government has made in scholarships, we really would hope to see much more impact. So I think it'd be useful to have a little bit of discussion about impact as well. From my perspective, maybe just to add a couple of points, given that we're really looking at sort of, politics of social protection. As we were discussing earlier as well, clearly a lot of social protection globally, as well in Nepal, particularly social assistance, initiation and expansion, is based on political decisions. And that's true across the world. In Nepal as well, we've seen not just in scholarships, but we have seen the social protection expenditure increase fivefold between like 2010 and 2020. And we're not just talking about scholarships, we're talking about general social assistance. And despite our attempts to understand, we've often not seen analytics behind these numbers and these increases. And so they're very, it's very likely that these expansions of benefits are more likely driven by attempts to win votes rather than the impact on beneficiaries or issues of equity. Even now, the monthly child grant amount is about 500 rupees and the old age allowance at 4,000. I mean, where is the equity in that sort of a decision? And given the upcoming elections, we have all heard hints of further increases. So it'll be interesting to see. And in the longer term, it would be quite interesting to see a mapping of increases in, for example, scholarships to political events. But I think these are all part of sort of our discussion. And really the question is, what is the intent of government beyond the political part? And is there an intent to really look at scholarships as a productive intervention, or in the World Bank, as we refer to as sort of human capital? I think in the other aspect of sort of implementation, very much there are aspects of implementation where there is power involved, particularly around when someone gets to select who is a beneficiary, regardless of how big the benefit amount is. But I do think in Nepal, there are many systems now that are increasing the accountability and the transparency in selection of beneficiaries. And this includes improvements in management information systems, includes digitization of systems, includes moving these payments through bank accounts. At least in the social security allowances, which I know much better than I do scholarships, we know that now of the 753 local governments, over 600 are making payments through banks. Obviously, all of this is reliant on human resources and people and capacities. And that is why I think, incentives of all of these different stakeholders is really key for us to understand when we look at the politics behind scholarships, and it's incentives of individuals and incentives of entities and agencies. I think for me, that is key if we're going to understand all of this. And finally, given that I don't know the scholarships programs as well as I know some of the social assistance programs, I'm really disappointed, I must say, to hear that, in almost 15 years now, given that the scholarship started, the girls' scholarship, it seems, started in 1972, that the government still does not have clarity of intent. And that really raises the question of what all this investment is about. So for me, I think, as a policymaker, Dr. Uma has given me a lot to think about. But I think a big part for us to think about as somebody in the World Bank who works with government is really also to think about incentives and how we can use those to address the challenges and the realities that she's mentioned. Thank you so much. I guess I will stop now. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Rajbhandary. That's very thoughtful comments there. Dr. Pradhan, would you like to address a few of those? We have many questions there, so you can choose to take the questions now or and give a few comments on Ms. Rajbhandari's queries. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I think that is the main thing in terms of like what I'm trying to really also highlight in terms of the politics of implementation is that the narratives do matter, right? Because why do we justify, what is the justification for scholarship program also matters in terms of how we're going to implement it. Is it going to be for, as you mentioned, the kind of like human capital intention? Then the implementation would follow a particular process, and if it is for social justice or distribute like this kind of protective, then it would follow a different kind of implementation trajectory. So even though these discourses might seem like words in terms of like it might seem like something that is just being said, and what is being said and what is the justification behind these programs are very, very important in terms of how it is implemented, who does it reach, and why does it reach a particular population and why. And that's why I think one of the I think key things in the policy implementation that we need to really focus on is that what is the intent of the program, why is this program important, yeah, one of the like and therefore I was also trying to highlight that because Nepali state doesn't really have this kind of logistical capacity, in some way some of these categorical targeting has actually helped the distribution of the scholarship program and the reach of the scholarship program, and to some extent maybe we should not really give that up if we really want to reach to protect the extent and the kind of reach that this program has, and that has come at the price of the amount distributed to the students, but it does have some kind of reach. And in the context like Nepal, where state programs are so limited, and especially in education, it's so limited, and the reach of the education and reach of education bureaucracy is we're still struggling with that in terms of bringing all the students to school, all these kind of access and attendance issues. The fact that people feel seen by the state is also quite important, and the fact that there is some kind of program that is there for different groups is also quite important. And at least, I mean, if I want to be very optimistic, at least that this is something that this program is doing, even though the amount is really, really ridiculously poor. I mean, it's small. I don't think it can cover anything at all, even in terms of the education costs that people might be incurring. About the digitization that is there in other programs, yes, in other programs there seems to be much more focus on, because also the amount is quite big in other social protection programs, quite reasonable in terms of the kind of money that is given for old age pensions or widow pensions and things like that, allowances, and in those digitization seem to have worked. But for scholarship program, the most of the schools and district education officers were actually really struggling with keeping even the database, and that was the major, like one of the biggest problem that almost all the schools were facing. They did not have, because the number of students that would qualify for scholarship programs would change every year, because students would move because of migration, because of various things. It will not remain the same. And so by the time they updated this year's data, it is already out of date. So this maintaining database has been very, very difficult. So in that case, in that context, I'm not sure how, I'm like this digitization of even transfers, blank transfers. I mean, it would be really good if this is possible, but I'm not sure how this would be done and to what extent this will be possible. And it'll be really good to really reach, in terms of really showing maintaining the accountability and ensuring that it's actually getting to the target population. That would really be good, but I'm not really sure how that would be practically possible, given already there is so much problem in implementation and distribution. Even when all these things it's just about really giving it to students who come to school. Even in that context there is so much problem. I think I'll just stop there.
Sure, thank you. Dr. Pradhan, we have many comments already there, so let me take 2 or 3 of them, and then so we can answer in batch. So first from Professor Alok Bohra, a couple of questions come to my mind. Were there any income-based qualification requirements? That's one. Has there been any evaluation of the effectiveness of these programs? How is the success or effectiveness of the program defined? That's his question. There is another one from Asta Bhatta. Has the amount of scholarship been revised since its introduction? Senior citizen allowance seem to have been revised quite frequently since its introduction. Why do you think social protection in education is not? So let's probably answer this, and we have another batch of questions already there.
Sure. Yes. Yes. for the Dalit scholarship and girls scholarship and scholarship for marginalized communities, which is decided based on the local list, there is no income-based qualification, but there is some kind of self-selection already here, because this is provided only to the students in government schools. So students in government school means already there is some kind of income based self-selection of who goes to government school and who goes to private school. So in terms of, because these are provided to all the girls and all the Dalits and all the marginalized students from marginalized communities in that particular in government school, there is already some kind of income based criteria that is already at play, even though that is not the criteria. This is for these scholarships, but for a poor and meritorious scholarship, which I mentioned towards the end, there is some kind of income-based qualification, and there is no. It is mainly on the basis of the assessment given by the teachers and head teachers in the school, and they would identify the poor and meritorious students. Has there been any evaluation of the effectiveness of these programs? There have been some evaluation, formal evaluation done also by the commissioned by the Ministry of Education, Department of Education, but not a lot of studies on scholarship program. And that's one of the reasons why we were trying to look at the education assistance program in our study, is because Nepal's social protection program tends to talk a lot about old age allowance, widow allowance, these kind of things, and focuses really on these. They are very, very well studied and talked about in terms of social protection programs, but somehow education assistance program is not really studied very much. So and one of the reasons why we wanted to do was to really, so much of money is actually being allocated for this, like it forms almost 6 to 7% of all annual budget, and there is always increasingly, there are more categories being added within the scholarship program. If you really look at the education budget, you'll always see these scholarship as one of the main budget heads in most of the education budgets. So one of the reasons why we wanted to do was this is not really one of the, I think, not well studied social protection programs. We don't know much about this. There are some evaluation programs commissioned by the government, but not many. Success of this program is really defined in terms of whether all the students who are supposed to be receiving these scholarships are receiving by the end of that academic year or not. It is really just about really disbursement of the money to the target students. And even in this criteria, most of the times, it doesn't seem like it is very successful. Not because students are not getting, but students do get, but they don't get in time. They may not get every year, and they may not get the amount that has been promised, even though this is only 400. Sometimes students are getting only 200 because the entire amount has not reached the school. So the effectiveness and the success is actually really only measured at the level of students getting this money, and yet in that there is quite a lot of problem going on, even when the success criteria is like very, very small and very limited and very focused. Even then the success is quite limited. Amount has not been revised a lot. As you can see, we're still talking about 400 to 600 per annum for Dalit and girl students, and it increases. This is for primary, and it increases at like secondary and higher secondary level. But yeah, but it hasn't been, and it could be possible because this is in addition to the school education that is supposed to be free, right? That this is more of an incentive program to draw girls to school, or draw Dalit students to school, or draw these various groups of marginalized communities to school. It is seen as more of an incentive program rather than a program that is supposed to cover everything. So it could be one of the reason. It could be that it hasn't been revised is because it is seen as an incentive rather than any kind of other kind of productive motivation. Um, um, do you think social protection in education? I suppose that, yeah. So basically, it's not. It hasn't been really revised. It's still very, very small, and one of the reasons why it's small is because it's being provided to everybody. So that is one of the things also that has been said in terms of like how the policy discussions in the policy documents also really talk about how this is actually a big amount when we look at the total amount invested, but when it comes to individuals, it's not a big amount, and therefore there's been a lot of discussion in terms of maybe indicating towards a need to consolidate and distribute it to more poverty-based, need-based kind of through those kind of approaches as well, because of the small amount that is being distributed. Yeah, I think that's those are that.
Sure.
Yeah.
So there is one from Ian on the donor coordination, but let me take two of, then we can come back to that.
Sure.
So there is one from Yamuna Gale. Has there been any differentiation in execution as per the provinces or local palikas? That's one. Second from Ian on girl and Dalit level are so small, under $8 per annum. The admin overhead of individual transfer must be a major constraint versus capitation lump sum grants to schools. Lack of monitoring evaluation under new federal structure also a major challenge. So that seems to be sort of an remark. And then so there is another one. I mean, I probably put that at the given the federal government structure empowering autonomy of the local government, should the donors seek to work to improve the design and overall impact by shifting to capitation grants type transfers to schools that would offset direct parental cost and allow school-led quality related spend. So I think the third one is a bit of a comment, but there are two questions on this. Probably after Dr. Pradhan, probably Ms. Bhandary can also sort of chip in on the donors, because World Bank is a big donor on the table. So yeah, Dr. Pradhan, please.
Sure. Yeah, in terms of if those were different in different places that we studied, it's actually a little slightly different in, we were hoping to find differences, but we did not really find a lot of differences in different districts that we studied. Slight difference was in Jumla, because the amount given is slightly higher. In Karnali district, Karnali scholarship programs are about 1,700, I think, compared to 400. So there was a little bit of political dynamics in terms of the politicians also wanting to come and distribute the scholarship, being present, local politicians being present during this distribution and things like that. A slight difference in terms of following the rules and regulations and maintaining the database was slightly better in Ilam than in other places. So, but these are very, very slight differences that we found in different districts. Not a lot in terms of delay, in terms of information circulation, the kind of lack of clarity. All those things were almost same in most of the places that we studied. Yeah, in terms of the way these are very small, yes, and the way this is transferred is this is actually transferred as a lump sum amount to school. It is not the district education office does not distribute to individual students. This is transferred to schools in as a lump sum amount, and the schools, like for example the head teacher and the teacher who is responsible for managing scholarship, and the accounts department, the person who is responsible for maintaining the accounts, they would ensure that it is distributed to individual students. So it does actually go to school, and therefore I was focusing on how it actually works. This kind of giving it to everybody works in the context of Nepali state's logistical capacity, limited logistical capacity, and yet it is not distributed in time. And this actually goes as either as one big lump sum amount to school, or sometimes as two big amounts to school, and the school would distribute based on their database, based on the list of students that they have who are girls and who are from Dalit communities, and they would take signatures from the students to who have got it. And if you really go and look at these schools, and if you try to look at these registers, you find lots of them do not have signature. It's like almost so even then the distribution is quite difficult.
Ms. Rajbhandary, would you like to take the donor question there from Ian in the forum?
Sure, maybe
Can I read it
just,
again?
if you don't mind. Yes, please. I was just looking for the question.
Sure. Given, let me see if, because okay. Given federal governance structure empowering autonomy of the local government level, should donors seek to work to improve the design and overall impact by shifting to capitation grants type transfers to schools that would offset direct parental cost and allow the school-led quality-related spend?
I can take a bit of a try, but since I'm a social protection person and not an education person, I don't want to misrepresent our education team, technically speaking. So maybe I'll speak a bit more broadly to it. I think one of the things that we look at when we see sort of education expenditure is half of education total expenditure is actually coming still from households, right? As Dr. Pradhan said, this is despite education being free. So I think there is a big issue in terms of the cost and how and who it is spent on. I think in terms of sort of what the development partners role or donors role is, I think there's two aspects. One, there is a continuous push from the DPs, mostly coordinated, in fact, to try and really build up local government capacity and improve the way the programs are being delivered, with a lot more focus on the role of local governments. However, even now, the majority of the education budget remains a federal budget. And a majority of that budget actually goes to human resources, goes to personnel. So a lot of the focus in terms of how to improve the program remains on human resources, right? If 70% of your budget is on personnel, you need to make sure that that 70% is being used well. So I think there are conversations that need to happen around both how the budget is being used. But when it comes to something like scholarships and the responsibility, as Dr. Pradhan said, in terms of what the schools do, the scholarships, if I understand correctly, are only provided once a year. The Social Security allowances are provided 4 times a year. And one of the things I think we as donors could do perhaps more is actually a sharing across programs. We know many of these ministries, as I must say, we do in our own organizations, think very sectorally. I think in exchange of how efficiency gains have been made in terms of design and impact, as I was saying earlier, payments could be something that the donors actually help with, right? We often talk about exposure visits to other countries, but what about exposure within our own country in terms of within programs? So I think there are aspects like that the donors can support in terms of improving the programs, but as well as the focus on improving sort of local government performance. But I think a lot of what we do is very technical. And I think we still need to, and I'll go back to what Dr. Pradhan was also raising, and I was raising as well, is ensuring that we get the right incentives in place. And I'm not talking only about money incentive, it's really about understanding what the different stakeholders have to gain from making these programs really be productive. I'll stop there.
Thank you. We have a very interesting question here from Pirsaman Tamang. This is a bit of a macro-led sort of question as well. It's sort of not just looking down there on the scholarship side, but putting Rabia Ministry of Finance hat over here now. Do you have any insights with regard to the sustainability aspects of the scholarship program? If you were to be the decision maker in the government, how much would you allocate for each type of the scholarships amount to be adequate? So the two, so sustainability of the program, but how much would you allocate? So Dr. Pradhan, what's your take on this? How much do you allocate?
Yeah, I think, I mean, that especially in the context of Nepal, where the government, especially the public education, is supposed to be free, right? So you're not supposed to have any tuition fees. But then what we also see in actual practice is that there are a lot of costs associated with education, even when students go to government schools, because there are quite a lot of costs associated with textbooks, even though textbooks are free, there are still a lot of private textbooks that are being used, which students have to pay for: notebooks, stationeries, uniform, opportunity costs like bus fare. They are not working and they're losing their labor, things like that. So there's quite a lot of these kind of. So I would say that at least the direct cost to education, if we were able to cover that would be really good in terms of the kind of stationery costs, notebooks, books, and uniforms, right? The kind of things that parents have to invest in, even though they're not paying school fees, and there are some kind of admission fees that a lot of schools charge, even though they're not charging the monthly tuition fees. So there are quite a lot of these kind of hidden costs associated with education, even though in principle it is supposed to be free. So something that could cover, depending on the situation, depending on the place and things like that, something that could cover the direct cost that students incur to go to school, I think could be considered as something that is adequate, I suppose, in terms of really looking at how much would be adequate. I mean, sustainability, I suppose, I mean, Ms. Jasmine would be maybe more well placed to answer that, in terms of, like, sustainability of overall social protection program has been one of the biggest concern, in terms of, like, how are we able to, with this increasing, the social protection program allocations are being increasing over the period of time, over the years. And that has been one of the concerns surrounding social protection programs in Nepal, and whether it is possible. I mean, we will be able to sustain just through donor money, or do we have internal amounts through tax and things like that? So I suppose I think maybe Jasmine will be better placed to answer that particular question.
Sure, I can jump in, but when it comes to the amount of the scholarship, I think that's a huge question. And I know, for example, organizations like WFP and others have done calculations of what could be adequate. But I'll take more the bigger question in terms of sustainability of social protection. So recent sort of expenditure review that both, I would say, actually the World Bank has done one and the UNICEF has done one, both around the same time. And in fact, our findings were very much aligned. And I believe my colleague Jyoti had presented some of these findings in one of the earlier IIDS sessions. Sustainability of the programs as they are right now is not an issue. An increase of some of these benefits is not an issue when it comes to equity. The big concern is really social protection more broadly, in that the large expenditure in social protection is not the type of social assistance programs they're talking about, but is in fact the civil service pension. And that is the big amount. And I think it's really important for us to go back to what we were talking about earlier, is what is the intent, right? If the intent, in fact, is leading to results where girls are staying and learning in school and are becoming teachers, lawyers, presidents, etc., those investments need to be seen as worth it. And that should be linked to the sustainability question, I think, is one part. And the second is not to look at each program separately. If we're looking at the overall objectives that the government has, so for example, National Planning Commission's documents, And there's a social protection framework that is still in draft. But what is the intent in those documents is social protection, and what is the cost? I think that that's the way we need to look at sustainability and look at overall intent, and then what we're achieving when we're looking at sustainability, but also look at the balance of where certain programs are now shifting to become contributory. So for example, civil service pension, or for example, the Social Security Fund. And that will help in the conversation around sustainability. And maybe just one final word, at least for the Social Security allowances, just to mention that to date, despite the growing amount, this has all been funded by the government. There is not yet donor funding for that. I think in education, it's a bit different because of the sector-wide approach. But just to mention that a lot of this is not, in fact, donor financing, but is government.
So I think we are a little bit already out of time, running out of time. So I think there is one more question from Ian, but I would suggest probably to go bilateral with Dr. Pradhan. I mean, you can Google her and find her email, or you can take the conversation further. But sorry that we had to start 5 minutes probably delayed due to the technical glitch. So we apologize again for that. So I probably on behalf of the organizing committee and IIDS, I would like to thank Dr. Pradhan and Ms. Rajbhandary for your time. Very grateful. This was a very interesting presentation. We had broadly on this topic, we had the discussion in January as well earlier. So you are, please feel free to watch our video that was it's uploaded in the IIDS website as well. It was again on social protection, a very lively discussion, a very interesting presentation at that time as well. So if you have missed out, please watch our video. But thank you again, Dr. Pradhan and Ms. Rajbhandary. I would like to thank everyone for joining in and asking really interesting questions. And next month we'll be back again, first Monday. Till then, everyone stay safe, and thank you very much for your time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.